just want to introduce our speakers. To my immediate right is Norma Rodriguez, and she is the Manager of Public Affairs at Planned Parenthood, Pasadena and San Gabriel Valley. She works on advocacy, legislative, and electoral strategy for the Planned Parenthood advocates. She spent over 12 years managing political outreach and grassroots organizing campaigns throughout Los Angeles County. Prior to joining Planned Parenthood, Norma worked at a private public affairs and marketing firm overseeing media and communications needs for the California Endowment's 10-year, $1 billion statewide Building Healthy Communities program in the cities of Santa Ana, Boyle Heights, South LA, Long Beach, and Coachella. She also managed communication and community outreach strategies for Fortune 500 companies such as SoCal Gas, HealthNet, and Frontier Communications. Were you looking for a pay increase? You went to Planned Parenthood. At the Service Employees International Union, Norma worked as a political organizer, field representative, and labor contract negotiator for local and statewide issues. Norma earned her BA in Political Science and Economics from the University of California, Berkeley, and master's degrees in Public Administration and Urban and Regional Planning from Cal State Northridge. So Norma is going to give a brief explanation of what she does in more detail.
And thank you all for having me here and caring enough about the alarming and escalating attacks on reproductive health care in our country and being here tonight. So one of the best parts of my job at Planned Parenthood is that I get to work with people throughout the San Gabriel Valley who are committed to making life better for the folks who live here, myself included. And I also get to hear really compelling and moving patient stories that talk about how Planned Parenthood was there for them when they needed it most. And so before I begin, I'd like to share a couple of quick stories from our patients just to really set the tone and have us all truly understand what's at stake. When we talk about abortion bans and the erosion of reproductive health care rights across this country, how they are alarming and the numbers are alarming and the statistics are horrific, but we really are talking about real people and their real lives. The first story is from Jasmine, and she wrote, "My husband and I used birth control that failed, and afterward I used Plan B, which didn't work because I was already ovulating, which I didn't know could happen. I became pregnant, and being 44 and not wanting children, Planned Parenthood gave me a medical exam that showed not only was I already pregnant, but that my fetus had died inside me 2 weeks before. They gave me medicine to induce my period since my body wasn't recognizing the death. Planned Parenthood is super important to me. And I've always informed my stepdaughters that they are an organization that would always be there for them should they need it. And I hope that's true." And the second story is from Sarah. "When I was 16, I found out I was pregnant at a young age. I did not know what to do. I knew that neither I or my partner were ready to be parents. Planned Parenthood helped me with the steps and confidentiality in having an abortion. When I called, they told me how I was eligible for Medi-Cal, and when I did receive my abortion, or before I received my abortion, they talked me through everything to make sure that I was sure about what I wanted. Years passed, and now being older, I have 2 kids. I'm not planning to have any more kids in the near future, so I have my birth control through Planned Parenthood, an IUD, and I'm making an appointment to get myself checked for STIs, just to make sure that everything's okay." So fortunately for Sarah and for Jasmine, they live in California, where they were able to access safe legal abortion when they needed it, and then were in turn able to determine their own reproductive timeline. But if Roe is overturned, 25 million women of reproductive age will lose the right to safe legal abortion in this country. 25 million people who, by the way, live largely in states that have non-existent or dismal sex education and access to birth control. And so folks will either need to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term or could possibly resort to dangerous methods to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. So there are currently 16 cases making their ways through the court system in this country, all with the purpose and aim to ultimately get to the Supreme Court and overturn Roe versus Wade. And so things like trap laws and the now infamous 6-week abortion bans taking hold in states like Kentucky, and Mississippi, and Alabama, and Missouri, and Ohio, and the list actually goes on and on, unfortunately. Some of these bans also seek to even jail doctors who perform abortions for up to 99 years. It's draconian, it's disgusting, and it's something that we need to prepare ourselves for the fight of our lives, really. The anti-choice movement in this country has set the stage. They've been working and chipping away at abortion rights for decades. And now that Trump and Kavanaugh are in place, this is their moment. They've set the stage, they've been working and planning for this, and this is the moment we're at today. And so, I just want to emphasize that this is about controlling women. The regulation of women's bodies is as ancient as time. It's a tool to control women's lives. So taking away the right to self-determination also takes away the right to educational opportunity or economic success, to either get yourself out of poverty or stay out of poverty. And so, for example, at Planned Parenthood, Pasadena-San Gabriel Valley, at our affiliate, 89% of our patients earn $24,000 or less. And nationwide, 75% of abortions that take place are had by low-income women. 59% already have a child at home. They're already parents, they have families, and they know that they cannot afford another child. 60% are in their 20s. If you think about a 20-year-old, they're often in school, they're trying to get their careers off the ground, and this is really what's at stake for women. So right now, the stakes are very high in general, but particularly high for low-income women of color. There's a lot of work ahead as we approach the primaries and general election in 2020. And while we do want to get Trump out of the White House, and that's extremely important, let's not forget that it's actually the House and Senate that have introduced and passed these dangerous bills. And so we need to elect representatives that will stand up for the right, for the expansion of reproductive health care and not actually take us backward to a time when women's lives and their futures were completely expendable. And so California is a leader in reproductive access, and we should be proud of that. We have a legislature that is cognizant of the importance of not only safeguarding the access we have now to abortion and other reproductive health care, but expanding that access into areas where women or young people who need reproductive care are often disenfranchised in rural areas, hard to reach areas, or even in urban areas where access is limited and there's a lack of primary care physicians and specialty care. And so that's why Planned Parenthood has been spending a lot of time in Sacramento working with elected representatives to further safeguard the access that we have now. In this past budget, we're very proud that we successfully lobbied Sacramento and the governor to expand reproductive health care funding by an additional $50 million. So there is now $100 million allocated in the state budget to ensure that everyone has access to reproductive health care. So that's a huge win for us here in California. And that funding will directly translate into the opening of more health centers and the expansion of the menu of services that we can offer. For example, at our affiliate, we are now offering PEP and PrEP, which are HIV prevention drugs. And we recently introduced trans care into our menu of services. So our transgender patients can come in for things like gender-affirming hormone therapy and other types of special care, all at low or no cost to them. So in addition to the budget fight, we're also working on Senate Bill 24, which is Connie Vega's medication abortion on college campuses. So any public university or campus in California should have medication abortion available to students who need it at their health center, and this will further remove barriers to accessing abortion for students who are often on very low budgets, who have no transportation, and it's just another win for us. And the final bill that we worked on is Assembly Bill 1264, which is a telehealth medicine bill. And we are working to ensure that providers like Planned Parenthood can access hard-to-reach rural communities through telehealth medicine and be able to provide reproductive health care to people who are often disenfranchised in many ways, including healthcare access.
She's a staff attorney with the LGBTQ Gender and Reproductive Justice Project at the ACLU of Southern California. She focuses on protecting access to reproductive health care, expanding the rights of pregnant and parenting workers, fighting gender discrimination in sectors traditionally dominated by cisgender men, combating discrimination against transgender and non-binary individuals, and improving the conditions and treatment in incarceration settings for women and LGBTQ individuals. Prior to joining the ACLU of Southern California, Aditi served as a Deputy Attorney General with the California Department of Justice. Aditi holds a Juris Doctor degree from UC Berkeley School of Law, a Master of Science degree in Social Anthropology from the London School of Economics, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Anthropology from American University. She currently serves as the Education and Advocacy Chair for Satrang, and did I say that right? Satrang? Okay, and co-director of grants and fellowships for the South Asian Bar Association of Southern California.
I'm really honored to be here and happy that we're having this discussion. This is obviously an issue I care deeply about. It's what I devoted my life to, but we rarely get invited to speak on this particular topic because I think that there's been this idea that abortion is legal, so it's fine, and the abortion bans are what started, this dismantling of rights and access in the U.S. But that's not true. Since 1973, after Roe was passed, we have seen law after law after law in all states across the country diminish access to abortion and make it just harder for people to get it when they need it, especially for lower-income people, especially for people of color. And so I've been eager to talk about this for a while, and really happy that this issue, not happy for the reason, obviously, the abortion bans weren't happening, but happy for so much interest in this topic now, when this has really been a problem for 40 years. So glad to see you all here, and thanks for the invitation to talk about this.
And our third speaker is Sharon Kyle. She is on the ACLU SoCal Union Board. She is a national board representative for ACLU, a law professor, and she publishes the LA Progressive, and she wears so many hats I can't possibly describe them all. So Sharon, I'm going to let you describe a little more in detail what it is you do.
So I know a lot of you. My husband Dick and I publish the LA Progressive, and it's a daily online social justice magazine. We've been publishing it for close to 12 years. And the reason I'm here is because the women's right to choose is one of the issues that we discuss a lot in the LA Progressive, under the umbrella of a bunch of other progressive issues. And I just think that it's really important. I had learned as being a board member of the ACLU, I was surprised to find out how it's becoming increasingly difficult for women, not just in Tennessee or Alabama or Mississippi, but right here in the state of California, especially areas in central California, how it's becoming more and more difficult for women to gain access and to make their own decisions about their body. So I think this was a great opportunity to bring this discussion here, particularly in the news. We heard just a couple of days ago that Tennessee is trying to position itself to challenge at the Supreme Court level Roe v. Wade. And so a lot of states are doing that. And we seem to think that we're safe here in California, but if it gets to the Supreme Court, we may not be so safe. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Now, I think Norma and Aditi are probably best suited to answer this because they're in the trenches. So even though it's still legal in California, technically, like Sharon mentioned, there are some restrictions. And I think there's a lot of restrictions nationwide, but I think probably in the Central Valley and some of the more conservative areas throughout California, they're probably going to try to do similar things to what they're doing in Tennessee and Alabama. They just can't do it on a statewide level yet. So I wanted to find out more about, because I've always figured California, we're safe, nothing bad's going to happen here, but if they do manage to overturn Roe v. Wade, we're going to have a big problem. But in the meantime, we have other littler fires, sort of all these restrictions that are being placed on abortions, even in this state. So I want to ask Norma and Aditi, how many facilities are there left in the state? How many places is it even possible to have an abortion? Also, maybe I just am silly, but can you get an abortion at a private doctor? I mean, could you do that? I don't even know. I don't know if that's even something that's available, or do you have to go to a clinic that's specifically designated for that? And then maybe you can talk about some of the restrictions that are sort of underhanded, backdoor attempts to either limit or completely make unavailable abortions without specifically passing legislation that outlaws it.
I think I can answer some of that.
There's a lot.
Yeah, so Planned Parenthood operates about 110 health centers throughout the state of California. Not all health centers provide in-clinic abortion or abortion services, but most do. So in this scenario where Roe versus Wade is overturned, thankfully, California has codified the right to abortion in the state constitution, and so that right would be protected. And what's likely to happen at the Supreme Court level is that there will probably not be a blanket abortion ban altogether. What will happen is likely that they will leave it to states to determine whether or not abortion is legal in individual states. States like Arkansas and a couple of others already have trigger laws in the works, where if that decision from Roe v. Wade were to come down and they said it's actually up to states to regulate abortion access, they would trigger an all-out ban on abortion. So in California, however, that's not the case. If it's in our state constitution, that right will remain. And so California, Washington, New York, and other states that have codified it in their state constitutions are actually ready and preparing to receive an overflow of women from out of state coming into California or New York or Washington or Oregon to receive abortion services in these states. And so that's kind of where we're going to be. It's going to be a tiered system. And when I mentioned the 25 million women who will lose the right to abortion access, those are particularly the states that are enacting these ridiculous bans at 6 weeks where women barely even know they're pregnant or are ready and poised to just outright ban abortion altogether should the Supreme Court come down with a ruling like that.
These bans are a new tactic. Before this, it's been sort of incremental restrictions on abortions and the plan has been death by 1,000 cuts to make it so difficult for people to get abortions that they just aren't completely unable to do. So banning it outright, which Alabama has attempted to do, and we joined, Tennessee is about to attempt to do, we will certainly, us or a similarly positioned organization will soon to enjoin. This is a new tactic and it's strategic because they believe the anti-abortion movement believes that they have the votes on the Supreme Court to fully ban it outright now. Whether that's true or not, we will see. They thought that before. They brought a similar, when KCP Planned Parenthood happened in 1992, right after Clarence Thomas was appointed to the court in 1991. So they thought they had the votes then and they didn't. And so it's not a guarantee that they do, but that's why these bans are happening now. It's a strategic decision. So before this, there were sort of various ways that that restrictions were enacted across the country, that some of which were struck down, but many of which have been upheld when challenged. Because we know that the abortion standard is that it can't be an undue burden. And so plenty of states, state courts have found that it's not, or federal courts have found in restrictive states that it's not an undue burden to do certain things. So the things that have been successful there's 5 different tactics that it is in effect a total ban, but it sounds better. It sounds like they're not completely removing the entire right. So organizations have sued and successfully enjoined those laws in all of the states because it's just so clearly an undue burden, right? It's clearly against Roe, and so if these bans are going to be successful, the Supreme Court is going to have to overturn Roe. Like, there's no reasonable legal argument that this is comporting with the legal standard put forth in Roe. And so after 6 weeks, there's Missouri that has enacted an 8-week ban, and Arkansas and Utah have an 18-week ban. So that's one tactic, is to put a gestational limit on the time period in which someone can access an abortion. Another is to put obstacles for the clinic and or the provider. And so we've seen this where, your hallways have to be a certain length, which, when you're getting certain types of abortions, like a medication abortion, the hallway does not matter at all. It's just taking a pill, right? And so they say that it's for the health of the woman and baby, but the restrictions they're putting in place have no relationship to actual health and safety of mother and child, or pregnant person or child. Another tactic is requiring what's essentially misinformation. And so there are states that require doctors to essentially just lie to their patients, right? They require doctors to tell patients that, there's 5 states that require doctors to tell patients that abortions may give them breast cancer. No medical evidence supports that. There's 8 states which require doctors to tell patients that they're likely to regret it. The percentage of people who regret their abortion is something around 5%. It's very, very low. So, there's really no data to support telling all your patients that they're going to regret it. The other tactic is just shaming people. By treating them like they don't know what they're doing, by treating them like they don't have the right information, requiring them to set up unnecessary appointments, requiring them to forcing them to look at an ultrasound. There's 18 states that require some version of this, some version of counseling before an abortion, where the purpose of the counseling is to get someone to change their mind. And then the last tactic that is also very successful is limiting access for vulnerable populations. And so things like banning abortion coverage, in insurance coverage of abortion. Many states have that. Closing clinics, so people have to drive hundreds of miles, that many people aren't able to. And so, that's what abortion looks like across the nation. As of today, abortion is still legal in all 50 states. Right? So we hear about these abortion bans, but all of them, none of them have gone into effect yet because they've either been successfully enjoined or the effective date of the legislation hasn't been reached. For example, it'll be like a January 1st, 2020 effective date. So as of today, all 50 states have legal abortion. But it looks like a patchwork. There's so many restrictions that are put up that effectively many states have just, made it so inaccessible that the right doesn't really exist. In California, as far as the right goes, we're doing really well. The Guttmacher Institute is a research institute that studies reproductive health and access in science, and they have like a 7-point scale for every state, and they rank every state from very hostile to very supportive, and California is the only state that's very supportive. We're doing really well, law-wise, and so we have had decriminalized abortion since 1967, which is before Roe, and then we have since then had an explicit constitutional amendment that legalized abortion in 2002. So even if Roe falls, the right to access an abortion will still be legal in the state of California. And I think you asked a question of, can you just get it at a doctor's office? Yeah. Well, in California, you can actually get it in several places. So as of 2002, California passed a law requiring all OBGYN training to cover abortion, which is not true in the rest of the U.S. There's about 30% of OBGYN trainings that don't even talk about abortion, which is wild. I mean, it would be like, being a cardiologist and not talking about like a heart attack or something, some major part of what happens to that body part is just not covered at all. That's not true in abortion. Every single person who's an OBGYN has had training in abortion care, even if they don't end up being an abortion provider. In addition to that, in, want to say it was, yes, in 2017, California passed a law that allowed you to get an abortion from a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, and a certified midwife. And so now those folks can now give certain types of abortions, including medication abortion. And so it's actually that the goal is to make it easier for people to, to access abortions, that you don't actually have to even go through medical school and residency programs to even give an abortion. And then a couple of months ago, in May 2019, California reaffirmed its commitment to abortion, passed a law saying that California is going to become a haven state, as Norma was talking about. So if Roe falls, California is really going to up its funding to try to train more people and invite people from restrictive states to come here. And so, legally, California is doing well. But as we've talked about, like, the law and reality is a pretty big gap where a lot of vulnerable marginalized people fall, right? And so, like, to really get an abortion, I think takes three different things. It takes the law, it takes, the right to have it, it takes the ability to afford it, and it takes the a licensed provider to exist. So someone has to be able to give it to you. So in California, we have the law. As far as the ability to afford it, in California, Medicaid covers abortions, and if you are part of a managed healthcare plan managed by the Department of Healthcare, your insurance has to cover abortion. That is a law. It is recognized as basic healthcare. Your private insurance has to cover abortion. So affordability, they're doing the best they can to make it affordable for Californians. It's really the third that I think we get stuck on. It's the ability to find a licensed provider and clinic. And there's a couple things happening here. The first is that there's just not enough people who are licensed to provide abortions. And so, California has a lot to. Sorry, do you have a question? Or do you
Not a question. I just want to say you made a statement a little while ago that said, someone said, where can you get an abortion here? If you have the money, I don't believe there is not a single doctor in California that will not give you an abortion.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's exactly right. And so, so for the third one, the ability to find a licensed provider clinic is certainly a factor of how much money you have, right? Because if you can travel, if you can fly, if you can move, if you can pay someone enough money, you'll be able to get an abortion. If you can't, then the proximity to an abortion provider is really key. And so, so two things are happening where there's not enough people going into becoming abortion providers and moving to rural communities to actually provide abortions. So that's a problem. The other thing that's a major problem is market consolidation of Catholic healthcare systems. And so 1 in 6 beds in California is owned by a Catholic hospital. Sort of the big player in all of this is called Dignity Health Hospital, which is buying up a lot of smaller Catholic hospitals, and they're becoming Common Spirit Health pretty soon. And they will own a remarkable amount of hospital beds in California, and they do not provide a whole host of services. They follow what it's called the religious directives of the Catholic bishops. And so they don't provide things like transition-related care, gender-affirming care, abortion in some cases, contraception, and sterilization. And a lot of rural communities only have a Catholic hospital option. And a lot of times you don't even know if your hospital is a Catholic hospital or not, right? Like, why would you know to look that up? You just assume that you can go to your hospital and get the whole breadth of services that you need. And so we have heard so many stories of people going, expecting to get the care that they need, and then being turned away and then being told that that care is intrinsically evil, so they can't get it here. And there are several communities in rural areas where this is their only option, and their next option is to drive, 200 miles, stay overnight, take their kids, all of that to try to get abortion, sometimes even contraception and sterilization.
Aditi just made a really important point about if you have money, you can get an abortion. That was true even before Roe v. Wade. That's always been the case. And it'll be the case in the event, in the tragic event, that Roe v. Wade is overturned. And all of the states that have positioned themselves to take advantage of that are states that have high concentrations of people of color, women of color particularly, that That's what we're talking about right now. Historically, those are the people who don't have the money, who lose access, and who seek alternative ways of ending an unwanted pregnancy. And what we're talking about here is, it's not that little girls think, oh, when I grow up, I can't wait to have an abortion. All of these people, all of these women who have to make that dreadful decision are doing it because they find themselves with an unwanted pregnancy. Now, there is a disproportionate, a huge disparity between Black women, white women, Latino women, and Asian women, and the amount of abortions that they have. You were just talking about the Guttmacher Foundation. I think it's a foundation. I was doing some research. And what they have found is that this huge disparity is directly tied to a lack of healthcare access, a lack of birth control, particularly with Black women. And it's not just a lack of birth control, it's also life conditions that exist such that these women find themselves just trying to make it day to day. So in the event that, we're already having problems in California, especially in Central California, when money becomes the primary answer, what we're going to see is that people of color, again, will be the ones who suffer most. One of the reasons that I do the work that I do, my husband and I do, is because I believe in what I call the centrality of race. And that is, if we look at what is happening to people of color, we generally can tell, we can use that sort of as a barometer. Lonnie Bonnier, who is a law professor, I believe at Yale, she wrote a book called The Miner's Canary. And she likens Black people to the canaries. Canaries were used in the coal mines to indicate that there was a poisonous atmosphere. And if you look at the lives of Black people, you can tell, do we have a poisonous atmosphere in our social, political, and judicial systems in this country? And what Black people can tell you is, you're looking at your own future. You can use the example of the foreclosure crisis. What happened with the foreclosure crisis, I think that was in 2008, well, Black people have been losing their homes at record rates a couple of years before it hit the rest of the population. And that's generally how it happens. So what's happening in Alabama for the Black women who don't have access because there's only one center in Alabama or Mississippi or Missouri, their intent is to have that happen to everyone. And so that's what we're up against. We're up against an authoritarian regime that does not like democracy. They don't like the idea that women should make their own decisions about their own bodies. And that's what we're up against.
And I did want to make one comment. That's actually important, and it's an important dot in this whole conversation. That it's actually not about, pro-life. Like it's actually a systemic attack. There's a recent loss of Title X funding. Title X program provides birth control. So if you really care about reducing the number of abortions, you would be promoting the use of birth control to avoid unwanted pregnancies. The Title X program has been around since the 70s. It's a Nixon-era program, and it serves 4 million women of color who are poor in this country. Gives them access to birth control, cancer screenings, mammograms, the whole kind of gamut of reproductive health, excluding abortions because of the HIDE Act. Federal money can't be used for abortions. And so the Title X program was specifically a program to support poor, low-income women of color access birth control easily. And as of 2 weeks ago, I think, or 3 weeks ago, Planned Parenthood has now opted out of that program because the Title X rule change took effect, and it placed these onerous, ridiculous requirements on doctors that you cannot mention the word abortion when you're talking to a woman about her reproductive options. You cannot refer out, and not even, this abortion as one of the options that she has when making her choices. And so I just wanted to highlight Title X and the importance, and much like the canary in the coal mine metaphor, the fact that not only are access to abortion being capped, it's also access to birth control, and that should be very alarming to us all.
So glad you brought that up, because I think that, a lot of times when people think that we're safe in California, and people are like, what is the Trump administration, how is that really affecting Californians? Title X is the clear answer of how it's going to affect Californians, because like Norma said, 4 million Americans access Title X programs, 1 million in California. 1 million. We have 1/4 of Title X people here, or Title X funding here. And so it is funding clinics up and down the state of California in some of the most needed communities, including a lot of Planned Parenthood clinics. And so not being able to, like Norma said, the federal funding already cannot fund abortion. So what Title X goes to is the plethora of other types of services. And the Title X regulation that, the rule that the Trump administration has enacted now, it's just has recently started to really enforce, requires the gag rule where you can't talk about abortion, requires physical separation to where you need to build a second clinic, essentially, one that provides abortion and one that provides all of the other services. I mean, there's just a litany of things that are attempting to make it impossible for clinics to provide abortion. And that is one clear way that it's going to affect California. And we haven't even seen how yet, because it just went into effect. They just started enforcing it a couple of weeks ago, because as soon as it was proposed, several organizations, including ACLU, sued to enjoin it, and the Ninth Circuit recently lifted the stay. So now it's being enforced until it hits the Supreme Court. I think there was a question.
Can I say a word? At 8500 South Broadway was one of the first Planned Parenthood clinics, and it's called the Dorothy Hecht Center, if anyone knows about it. Dorothy Hecht was my mother, and that is why my husband and we have built 3 Planned Parenthood clinics in partnership with Planned Parenthood. 3/4 of my life has been involved with abortions. A book about me came out several months ago. It's on Amazon. But the point is, I'm also the only woman that was ever Billie Holiday's piano player. So my life has been between music and abortion rights. I'm currently on the board of, I think she's here, Gabriel.
She's on the board of the Women's Reproductive Rights
right.
Assistance Project.
Thank you. I'm on the board of that. What we do is, my book, incidentally, my book on the cover's got everybody that I've ever worked with, from Sinatra to Billie Holiday and everybody else. That's not the point. The point, I could start. 3/4 of my life has been about abortion rights. I'm from a small town in the Midwest, and one of the first jobs that I got out here, I was a 20-year-old virgin, and we won't talk about my background in music, but one of my first jobs was at the Coconut Grove, which was considered the most gorgeous nightclub in the whole world. And I fell in love with one of the guys in the band. And of course, I was lucky, because he found a doctor that tested me, and he said, "Young lady, you're 6 weeks pregnant." Now remember, I was a 20-year-old virgin. And he said, I don't do abortions, but I do know someone. But I want to take you, because you can't go in the book. Incidentally, they're doing a documentary on me, 2 producers in San Francisco, on abortion thing, because one of the other things that I had, when my dad back in the Midwest heard that I was playing with Billie Holiday, all kinds of drug addicts and everything. Incidentally, to this day, I don't even smoke, but that's another thing. Point was, they came out, my family had clothing stores in the Midwest. They came out and they opened a clothing store on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood.
Could you hold the rest of that story? It's really fascinating. fascinating.
No, but I just want to tell you
Okay,
what
well, it's quite a bit,
the
thank you.
documentary is about now. Is because in my store, and this was in the 60s when abortion was still illegal, it's called the Green Door because I made it in my store that if you needed an abortion, you came to my store and you said, I'd like to see a dress that maybe in green or something. We said, oh yes, step in the back. And I had 2 doctors that were doing safe, legal abortions. And if you came into my store and you went into the Green Door, you were taken, we were told, the 2 doctors. So that's what this documentary about me.
Thank you. I think I've actually seen that documentary.
That's it, I'm done.
It's excellent. And hopefully you can tell us a little bit more about it at the end.
No,
Because it's really an important
Next.
documentary.
Next.
Oh, do you have a question in the back?
Yes, I did. What's the current status of the healthcare provider conscience issue? Is there a regulation on it? Is it a rule? Is it pending?
Yeah, so there's so many conscious provisions that rules that HHS has, which is the section 1557 of the ACA, which is the non-discrimination principle of the ACA, that says that essentially you can't discriminate on the basis of, and it enumerates categories, and so you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, race, etc. And it defines, so the 2 important things that it did that the Trump administration rolled back, or is attempting to roll back, is it defines sex to include gender identity and gender expression and termination of pregnancy. And so the Trump administration, the HHS, proposed a rule essentially rolling both of those back. They're claiming that, oh, it's too confusing and it's conflicting with other religious exemptions, which is not true. And it's actually going to increase, other than the fact that it's going to invite discrimination against people who have had abortions and against trans people. It also creates an incredible amount of conflict because that's how sex is defined in all of these other federal laws, in our educational, educational code, in our insurance code. That is the definition of sex. It's inclusive of gender identity. It's inclusive of termination of pregnancy. So they've proposed this rule. The public comments are due today, actually at 9 p.m. So we have 1 more hour if anyone wants to submit a comment. We, ACLU Southern California, submitted a comment explaining the impact on California, which is pretty great because we have a lot of LGBTQ folks in California and we have a lot of people who've had abortions in California. So that is one of the many things that HHS has perpetuated that allows providers and clinics to claim a religious exemption to discriminate against various groups.
Just a quick follow-up. I read that this would entail pharmacy workers, anyone who was in any way involved in providing anything related to healthcare or healthcare supplies could, because of their conscience, refuse to serve. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so that's actually another rule that's also from HHS that does include essentially saying that if you are anyone who is touching abortion, you have the right to say that you don't want to provide, for example, medication for a medication abortion. That is still pending. The rule has been proposed and public comments have been submitted, and then the final rule has not been published yet. I will say that in California, that is not legal. If a pharmacist has the right to assert a religious exemption to not provide medication they don't believe in, but they have to do it behind the scenes, and the patient can never know about it. They can't come to you and say, I don't believe in your abortion, I'm not giving you this medication. They actually have to go back and tell another pharmacist, I don't want to fill this prescription, can you do it? And essentially it's supposed to be seamless service for the patient.
I read recently an op-ed in the LA Times about the growing ease with which American women can now order medication from abroad and possibly in America, I'm not sure, but anyway, and that it's probably going to become the standard where you get abortions, not a physical abortion, but you take the pill. What do you know about this, and how soon is this coming? It's supposed to be very safe. It's
exploring what we can do to help everyone else. And one of the easiest things that we can do is telemedicine and shipping medication. And so that is certainly something that a lot of abortion providers are really looking into now, is really thinking through like telemedicine, meaning, it's essentially like a video conference, and then prescribing remotely and then shipping the medicine to the person. And also there's a lot of organizations that are creating and disseminating information on self-managed abortions, doing that by pills, by herbs. There are ways to do that, before a certain gestational period that are safe, even if they're illegal. So yeah, I mean, that's the, if Roe falls, that's sort of the next wave is going to be trying to figure out how to get safe abortions to restrictive states, and medications are really good ways to do that.
Thank you, and I think that should be done, but then we also need to look at the political alternatives, because this whole business of taking away a woman's right to choose, just like Aditi said, it started back in 1973, which also in 1973 what started was an effort to switch this country around. There were people who were very dissatisfied with the success of the civil rights movement. Back before 1973, a lot of the Democrats in the South switched over and became Republicans, partly because of the success of the civil rights movement. And there was an effort to racialize politics and to garner support of the religious right. So the religious right became politicized, and this was done with intention by a sector of the population who knew that their politics were not going to be very popular with the masses, because their politics skewed towards benefiting the rich. So they incorporated this business of getting rid of a woman's right to choose. Their intention was to try to get Catholics to join forces with them and to get religious people to join forces with them. And in some respect, they were very successful. So while they tout this line about being pro-life, they also tend to be the ones that are pro-death penalty, pro-gun. So this pro-life is really an effort to build up a certain authoritarian ideological group. Politically, we have got to stand together and undo the damage that they're doing.
And I just also want to add, so glad that you're on this panel, Sharon, to like bring us back to kind of the racial lens and reality of the way that this would be implemented. So I don't want to talk about telemedicine as if that's going to be a neutrally implemented model, because we already know that 19 states have criminalized self-managed abortions and telemedicine, specifically for abortion. Telemedicine of other sorts is legal and fine, but specifically for abortion, it is criminalized in these states, and that will, continue to grow, and we know that it will be disproportionately enforced against people of color. So, in a world where telemedicine is our only option, we know that that's not a neutral world at all. It's going to be, it's going to continue to be inaccessible to the same people as accessible today, just in a different way.
Sharon, I think you can probably best address this. I heard on the radio the other day, and being sort of naive in a lot of respects, I heard that a lot of the white supremacist groups are in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade, and maybe you can speak to why that is. It doesn't sound like it's a very well thought out idea, which doesn't surprise me because I don't think thinking is their strong point, but I was trying to get my head around it and I can't.
So yeah, there is a small group of people who believe that one of the ways to get rid of this problem of having a majority people of color country is to have more white babies. And so this group of people is pushing for getting rid of a woman's right to choose in an effort to have more white babies.
But do they not realize that's not going to result in probably more white babies?
No, I don't, yeah, obviously I don't
It seems like
endorse, and I don't think that their decisions are fact-based. I mean, there's a faith-based organization that targets African Americans. And this faith-based organization has been working with African American leaders in certain sectors of the country and have convinced them that abortion is a eugenic goal and it's an opportunity to get rid of black people. So there are people, there are different factions that are approaching this business of taking away a woman's right to make decisions about her own body. And yeah, those are a couple of them. There are others.
I have a question. Are there any people moves to try to, I forget what the Mann Act was it, to bring people across state lines for the purpose of prostitution? Was that what it was called? Anyway, something like that, so that people in some state where Ohio, for instance, could come to California, could drive to California or move to California to get an abortion. Are there any legal moves in that direction?
I don't think that there are any barriers that would stop anyone. The only thing that would stop many people is finances.
Right.
That's a
in
big
the works.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, because even in those states where, like Aditi was saying, all 50 states, abortion is still legal. But many of the states, they have made it so difficult that you might as well say that it's not legal. So in those states, those women could go to other states as well, or could travel hundreds of miles to the one center. So, I don't know of any efforts. I imagine that there are efforts to help people get across state lines.
Several months ago, there was an article in all these states, the southern states started wanting to enact these. There was an article in Washington Post about underground railroads being reestablished now, particularly going into New York.
Yeah. So we're really in a bad way, and I tend to stay on this one point, and the point is that since the Voting Rights Act was gutted, voter suppression laws have proliferated across this country since Shelby v. Holder. I think it was 2013. In 2017, over 90 pieces of legislation were introduced to find ways to oppress the vote. And they are targeting people of color when they attempt to oppress the vote. So it's not a direct connection, but this impacts the kinds of legislators that come into office, the kinds of people that get to sit on the bench. All of this turns out what we're seeing now. So we have to understand that there is a need for us to unite. There's a need for us to look at what happens with people of color as a barometer for what's in store for everybody else. And to not even just think of ourselves as allies. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Like my husband, who is white. He's not my ally. He is just as impacted, and everybody else in this room is just as impacted when those draconian measures become law. We have to be united, and we have to be co-conspirators or collaborators, but not allies. This is all about life.
If Roe versus Wade is overturned, might it not wind up actually being good for the economy of California in that, all the people who will be traveling here to get abortion?
I think what is important to focus on, though, is the millions of women who will not be able to afford travel, time off work, childcare, lodging, and plane ticket to California. And so the disenfranchisement of poor women of color is very alarming. But I think for being a haven state of, shouldn't preclude California from being a haven state. The fact that so many countless women would be in that terrible position back at home.
I just wanted to share a resource that I've seen with people coming from other states, which is Access Women's Health. It's an organization in California that supports people who have to travel either inside California or from another state to California to get an abortion, and they train volunteers to provide very practical support, like you can house someone in your apartment, or you can drive them to their appointment, or provide childcare while they're getting their appointment. So people who want to be very actively involved in supporting these people can look up Access Women's Health and get involved in their network.
Yeah, Aditi, thanks for citing that. I actually had that written down as like a call to action at the end because they're accepting applications now. They're an incredible organization. They're all across the country, and you can give, you volunteer, you drive people to their abortions, you can house them, you can give them like food, you can just call them to give them support. They're very necessary, especially in rural communities where people might not be able to drive, they might not have a car, they might not, have support from their families and friends. So yes, Access Women's Health, they're looking for practical support volunteers now.
So I had a question too about, I keep hearing about these, these laws criminalizing abortion and criminalizing the providers and criminalizing the women having abortions, and that's obviously a draconian way to try to crack down on it. But I'm curious, what are the penalties? Are these felonies? Are they misdemeanors? I mean, what are the possible, what are the potential penalties for these things? And I'm just curious, what do they intend to throw people in jail, or are doctors going to be stripped of licenses, or what are these penalties? I'm curious.
All of the above. There are fines and there are penalties, and this is also not something that's new. Pre-Roe, there was criminalization of abortion, but largely it was criminalization of providers. Now, when we talk about going back, we're not going to be going back because it's 2019 and not 1972. So there's a lot that's different, and some is good, some is bad. The good thing is that we have so much more technology. So we will find ways to get abortion to people who need it, or at least we have ways to do it, and hopefully we'll find it and be able to actually effectuate that. The bad news is the ways that abortion is going to be criminalized will be greater than what it was before. Before it was largely just abortion providers, but now states are looking into providers and the people who are seeking abortion and everyone who aids and abets those people. So that means driving your friend to the clinic, that means supporting that person afterwards.
So it doesn't mean the man that got you pregnant.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Right. Yeah, so the criminalization regime could potentially even be larger than it was pre-Roe. And as far as what the penalties are, it's fines, it's jail time, and it's taking licenses away from doctors.
Sure, my guess as far as criminalizing a man, it would be probably depends entirely on race. The way things are going. Good point, Marla. Good point.
When do you anticipate the first round of cases hitting the Supreme Court? And I ask that because it reminds me of a comment that Bernie Sanders made during one of the debates. He suggested that Kavanaugh could, although he has a lifetime appointment, he could serve that appointment in another court. So do we have time to put Kavanaugh in some court of appeals in East Jabip someplace before all of these cases come before the Supreme Court?
What are you suggesting, that he be impeached?
No, that he sort of rotated
No,
off.
not impeachment. It was placing him in a different court. He still had his appointment, but just not on the Supreme Court.
I've never heard of a mechanism for
I've heard that all it requires is that he has the appointment as a justice. It doesn't require that he serve on the Supreme Court.
I understand that, but what is the mechanism for saying, okay, get out of the Supreme Court, go over here? I mean, who's going to do that?
Yeah, that was unclear.
Yeah.
That was unclear.
That seems, there's still more of that important point to that whole process.
Maybe grabbing him by the scruff of the neck or something.
What's that?
Maybe grabbing him by the scruff of the neck.
So in California, I know like we're a safe haven state, or I always have thought of us as being sort of like, immune. I mean, frankly, in the last 2.5 years, I've never been so happy to live in a liberal state. I'd be a liberal, one of those people. How have the Planned Parenthood and these other organizations been impacted by the craziness of the far right? I mean, do we have fewer clinics now? Do we have less funding? Or does that tend to vary a lot? Within California, are there big discrepancies in terms of, I would imagine Visalia wouldn't be exactly a hotbed of abortion, or some of those other places, Bakersfield, some of these places that I unfortunately have to go to. I seems like they're, like, have things been impacted in the last several years in those areas? Or is there just less available because of this movement of the far right?
You know, Planned Parenthood, we operate over 100 centers statewide. We're kind of broken up by affiliates. There's 7 affiliates statewide, and so it's largely regional. The Marmonte affiliate, where I think is the central kind of valley area, they do have clinics, and there are certain communities where the distance, you know, between health centers is great. And I don't know that off the top of my head, but I think Planned Parenthood does recognize that access in California, as friendly as it is to abortion and reproductive health, has a long way to go. And that's the bill that I was referring to earlier, AB 1264, is a telehealth, telemedicine bill, specifically for that reason, to reach those communities that lack primary care physicians, that lack specialists, and who will be able to provide reproductive health services basically over the internet with doctors. So that's one way that Planned Parenthood is working to expand access and close that gap.
All these places up north, I can't imagine there's any place within hundreds of miles of somewhere like Lake County. So I just wonder, I mean, I guess, so they would be moving toward more of a telemedicine, like maybe a pill, take an abortion pill or something, rather than try to get to a facility that may or may not exist.
Correct.
Okay, well, that's good to really have an alternative, I guess. I mean, I always just sort of thought of California as kind of a safe haven, but then I realized that there's so many conservative areas in the state that are, as conservative, if not more so, than places like Alabama.
What is the impact of intimidation and threats of violence been in California?
So unfortunately, since Trump was elected, there has been an uptick, a notable uptick in the number of protests and the number of threats to different health centers. And on the flip side, although since Trump was elected, we also saw a huge boost in our volunteers and our donors. And so I think it's been motivating for both sides. But Planned Parenthood is a very old organization that has faced real threats of violence since its inception, part and parcel to the work that we do. But there has been a notable uptick in protest activity and just anti-rhetoric addressed to our health centers.
Do you see a correlation between a democratically controlled Congress versus a Republican controlled Congress and the amount of funds, federal funds that flow?
I have to look at previous legislatures, but I think by and large, at least here in California, there is a Democratic supermajority. And so definitely a friendly environment. Just the fact that we were able to secure an additional $50 million in the state budget speaks volumes that access to reproductive health care and abortion is something that a Democratic legislature sees as important. And I think that's in large part to the work that Planned Parenthood does, and just the constant pounding on the door of the legislature and having them not forget that this is something we are constantly working toward, and that California, as good as it is, we can't sit on our laurels, and we have a lot of work to do still here.
I can give one example of, because you asked specifically about federal funding and how it differs based on the administration. So before this year, there's an organization called Essential Access Health, which is the administrator of Title X funds for California. And before this year, it has been the sole administrator. So that means that all Title X funds that come from the federal government go to Essential Access Health, and Essential Access Health gives it to its sub-grantees, including Planned Parenthood. And so that's the way that the federal money flows. As of this year, there are now 2 administrators of Title X funds, Essential Access Health and an organization called O'Brien Medical Group, which is a crisis pregnancy center. It's a fake women's health clinic. It's the type of health clinic that sort of lures people in by saying that they're going to provide comprehensive medical care actually then, you know, if someone says that they want an abortion, they don't give abortion counseling, they don't give the full, options counseling. And then if someone says they want an abortion, they steer them away from that and only give prenatal care. And so that's one way that, you know, now Title X fund is not evenly split, certainly. There's only, I think, 4 O'Brien centers that are receiving Title X funds, but they're sort of like, you know, stepping away funds from what should go to clinics like
And just to put it further into perspective, Planned Parenthood was a recipient of Title X money that covered 4 million women across the country. And of those 4 million women, Planned Parenthood served 41% of those women. And so if you think about what impact that is, the loss of Title X funding, you know, of Planned Parenthood, by Planned Parenthood, it's catastrophic. I mean, almost half of the women that were benefiting from the Title X program were Planned Parenthood patients, and if Planned Parenthood is no longer taking Title X money, it just leaves so many women without further access, and so it's.
Is there anything that legally prevents local governments, like say, you know, the Board of Supervisors of Riverside County or Tulare County or any of these groups from not outlawing abortion, but implementing restrictions like waiting periods or, you know, things like that, you know, the time limits on, you know, the gestational time limits. Is there anything that prohibits them from implementing their own local controls and, you know, trying to say that they should have autonomy over their local governments?
They can try, and it'll almost certainly get challenged, and I don't think that it'll be successful because the way that it's framed in the California Constitution is really comprehensive. It's a state may not deny or interfere with women's right to choose or obtain an abortion prior to the viability of the fetus. It's purposefully left vague so it can be as protective as possible. And so that's not to say that some, you know, conservative part of the state won't try, but I don't think that it would help in California.
I think one way that local governments could, though, impact access is if they attempted to restrict food zoning. Exactly. I think that helps if they wanted to open and they, you know, fought it in some way through eminent domain or just other kind of zoning regulations that would prevent a medical facility from opening up in the community.
Have you noticed any, anything substantive, really major changing in California in terms of access to abortions? I mean, has it gone down remarkably? Has it gone up? I mean, has it stayed about the same? Has there been really much impact from what's going on the national level in a lot of other states?
Says no, not yet, because so much of this is still unfolding and happening as we speak. And so I don't know that we're far enough along to actually see any consequential kind of outcomes, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. We're kind of at the cusp right now because there are several things that could happen. Title X funding, especially because it's not going to be going to Planned Parenthoods, could suddenly be fully funding these crisis pregnancy centers. So we could see a proliferation of those types of clinics pop up. We could also see more market consolidation of Catholic health centers, especially as religious exemptions become more protected and people start using, providers can use those more freely. So I think that I think that the answer is not yet, but they're setting up the foundation to allow that.
And one thing that we haven't talked about at all is the impact if ACA, if Obamacare goes away, which we know that is what they're trying to do. So that's a whole nother can of worms that will impact this discussion.
What can we do to start fighting it and to not be there, because so many times the earthquake happens and people are not prepared. So what can we do to do something now and educate others, because it's legal still, but people sadly act as if it's not.
Yeah, what can the average person do to sort of, prevent this from really taking over and us becoming Alabama?
The go-to answer to that question is usually get involved. And it is critical now for all the reasons we've talked about. We have two very, very important elections at our doorstep that are happening. And And so as much as folks can engage with their local organizations who are working on these issues on the ground, organizations like Planned Parenthood, ACLU, and really, one of the things that Planned Parenthood is committed to is voter engagement and voter registration and voter education. We know that we have public opinion on our side. Most Americans believe that abortion, the right to safe legal abortion, should stand. Almost 60% of Americans and Republican men believe that women should have the right to make that choice for themselves. Planned Parenthood has a 77% favorability among voters. Poll after poll shows that public opinion is on our side. And so the fact that states like Kentucky and all of the usual suspects that are enacting these draconian laws and bans, these representatives keep getting elected because of gerrymandering, because of voter suppression. They are not representative of, the overall sentiment of the American public. And so I feel like arming ourselves with that knowledge that we have public opinion and public support on our side should really help mobilize and inspire people who are maybe on the cusp of like, does it really matter in the end, to engage, especially around elections, because that's ultimately where our fate lies. We have a democratic system and we have to take advantage of it as much as possible for as long as we have it. To make sure that we get these guys out of office and we put the right people in place.
I'm so glad you brought up the statistic that 60% of people in the U.S. do support abortion, and in California that number is even higher, it's closer to 70%. So that is a great reminder that our opposition may be loud and they may be in power right now, but it is the minority in this country, and that's why they're being so loud, because they know that their power is limited. And that's not the direction that this country is going. But for the question of what we can do in California, I have two things that are California specific. And so the first is for these Catholic hospital mergers. California is actually the only state in the country that prior to a merger, the California Attorney General has to approve the merger. And they can do a variety of things. They can either approve the merger, they can reject the merger, or they can put conditions on the merger. And we have actually been successful in the past to get conditions put on the merger to make it less restrictive and to have the healthcare be more inclusive for all people who need it. So we, ACLU Southern California and ACLU Northern California monitor these healthcare mergers pretty closely, because we know that for many people in rural communities and many low-income people of color, this is the only healthcare that they have access to. And so when a merger is happening, generally the Attorney General will schedule hearings on the mergers up and down the state of California. If it's a big merger, they will be close to 20 hearings across the state, and that is when we attempt to mobilize people to show up to the hearings and talk about why it's important for everyone to have access to healthcare, and to tell personal stories about I went to this hospital, I would need access to X service that wouldn't be available, and that would be a problem. And those types of stories are moving and powerful and successful. That's really the only thing that has kept, that has sort of stemmed the tide a little bit. So one is just sort of like watch out for those mergers and watch out for our emails. If you are on our email list, we will tell you when to show up and when to give testimony, and that testimony matters. And the second is what Norma has talked about, SB 24, which is a bill that we are also co-sponsoring with several organizations that would require all public universities and colleges in the state of California to provide medication abortions. This is a really big deal for many reasons. So there are many students that can't access abortion because they don't have a car, because the next clinic over is hundreds of miles away. There are a lot of public colleges and universities in rural areas, and so this is a great way to put access to abortions in those areas. So it's SB 24, it has passed our Senate, it is in front of the Assembly. Call your Assembly person, tell them that this is something that we believe in. It's not even going to cost the state of California anything, because there's actually an anonymous donor who's funding all of the medication abortions. So there's really no reason for them not to pass this. So call them, SB 24, and do that soon, because it's actually being heard pretty soon.
So be Debbie Downer. Actually, I don't. But Norma was talking about how Planned Parenthood is polling so favorably, and Aditi was talking about, well, you know, the bad guys are in the minority. Well, recently I read about a study that was done by, I believe it was a sociologist from Yale and New York Northwestern. And they did a data collection of over 20 years of legislation, thousands and thousands of pieces of legislation across this nation. And they compared the outcomes, the legislation that was written, and they compared that to what the people actually wanted. And they found that you pretty much had a snowball's chance in hell of getting what you wanted your legislator to vote for unless you had deep pockets. So whenever the deep pockets and the corporations, when they said what they wanted, that's what happened. So what can we do? We have to believe in participatory democracy. I'm sure that many of you see what's happening in Hong Kong right now. The airport was closed down in Hong Kong. People across this world are getting tired of this sort of authoritarian rule that seems to be in vogue. Dick and I will be hosting the 3rd annual Left Coast Forum, October 11th, 12th, and 13th at Occidental College. It's an opportunity to learn how you can get plugged in and engaged, regardless of what your issue is. We will have speakers, we will have people tabling, we will have opportunities to network, connect, learn, and try to take this situation in hand the way we should. That's what democracy is about. But according to those 2 professors, we do not have a democracy. We have an oligarchy.
Are there any particularly heinous cases that could be coming up from one of the states, one of the lovely red states, to the Supreme Court that have, you know, insane restrictions on abortion? I mean, which one's next in the barrel? Does anybody know?
Tennessee, Alabama. I mean, I guess I don't really know what the Supreme Court's going to take up. And I actually think we never answered your question, which is what does the Supreme Court term look like and when might it happen? So, you know, the Supreme Court didn't take up anything this term, but the new term starts in October. And that, you know, those decisions will come out anytime between then and June. So they could take something up. And we're really not sure how far they're going to go, or if they're going to go anywhere. And correct me if I'm wrong, that access to abortion for people who are detained in immigration detention centers. So that's a really hard question to answer because immigration detention is such a black box. I can tell you what the rights are. So ACLU, including ACLU Southern California, filed a case about 2 years ago, the Jane Doe abortion case, which was on behalf of a young woman who was an unaccompanied minor. She was 17. She had a very dangerous journey to the U.S. when she got here. And she was raped along the journey. She became pregnant when she got here. She attempted to, she asked for an abortion, and the Trump administration advised the shelter in which she was staying to not give her an abortion. They just said, we're not going to do that because it would be the federal government sanctioning her abortion, even though that is her right to have. So we filed, we were successful, she was able to attain her abortion. The thing that was very concerning about that case is the judge that initially denied her an abortion was Kavanaugh. And this was when he was on the DC circuit, so before he became the Supreme Court justice, he denied Jane Doe her abortion, and then we asked for the case to be heard en banc, which means all of the justices of the DC circuit sat and reversed his decision. So that is very concerning. And so, essentially to your question, people who are in immigration detention centers do have a right to an abortion. You do not lose your rights because you are a non-citizen. You do not lose your rights because you are detained. You have the right to an abortion. Difficulty that people have attaining an abortion, we don't always know. Sometimes we get calls and we will file cases immediately when that happens, and sometimes they are successful. But the real problem is just access to information. Immigration detention center is such a black box. It's so hard to even get attorneys in there to do direct representation of people, and so it is so hard to know whether people want an abortion and aren't able to receive it. We also know that the instructing people to talk young immigrants, young unaccompanied minors out of their abortion. And so, that is something that we're also looking into and trying to get more evidence for. So it's a hard question to answer, because the answer is that you have the right to an abortion even if you're in an immigration detention center. We don't know how accessible that right is. And when we hear that it's not, we do something about it, but we don't always hear it. We have a access to knowledge problem.
And aren't there also physical barriers? I mean, wasn't there an issue with that young lady who was finally granted access, but then there were issues as to who's going to take her physically from there, and are they violating the law, and are they allowed to? So there's all these other barriers too, where they say, okay, sure, you can do it, but we're not going to let you leave.
Yeah, completely.
We're not doing it here, we're not letting you
They
leave.
had to, because they wanted to say that the federal government didn't want to be in charge of actually, facilitating her abortion, so they had to get a sponsor to come and even do the drive, and we had to get a doctor to fly in from another state because couldn't find a doctor in the area when she was staying in Texas. I mean, it was just like, it was a lot of logistics just to access a basic right, a fundamental right.
But, I mean, it's just another arbitrary way. So like a lot of these rights exist on paper, but in reality they don't. And I think that's what a lot of these restrictions are intended to do.
My name is Sylvia Kazarian, and I am Executive Director for the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project. We have been in business since 1991. We are the largest national independent abortion fund. We provide abortion funding across the U.S. And we have now specific funding for southern states as well as in the Midwest. And, I really appreciate everything that these folks have said today. It is true. One of the things that we notice quite a bit, and this is something to really take to heart, is that in our data from last year, from 2018, 79% of the patients that we served had their partner abandon them. 79%. So imagine this, a person needing an abortion not only has no financial means to do so, but in a lot of states, they have to travel, and travel costs money. And with all the barriers that are being put up, as particularly in certain states, they also have to pay for hotel stays, because there are barriers of 72 to 24-hour waiting periods. But there's also childcare. And most of the people that we are serving are people of color. And a lot of them live at or below the poverty line. And a lot of these patients are scared because when they hear that things are happening in Tennessee or Alabama or Arkansas, they think that they can't get services. But legally, in all 50 states, like they said, abortion is still legal. And we help as much as we can across the U.S. And we have a booth here in the back that has a lot of information. If you want to get on to our mailing list, please sign on. The best thing as an abortion fund that you can do for us is to fundraise for us. The other thing I tell people too, when we're talking about, elections and voting, it's really, really, really important to know who you're voting for when you're talking about judges. Keep that in mind, because if you look at what's happening, you know who's making those decisions. It's really important that you get educated and you educate those around you. And let's bring the younger audience on board to get to voting. A lot of people are not, familiar with Roe v. Wade because they were born after all of this, right? So to them, it seems like it's just going to be there, And so we depend on all of you to help with all of this. I probably said more than I should have, and I'm very sorry, but okay. And if you have any questions for me, feel free. I'm in the back there. Okay.
We put out political comments about the different judges' positions. That's the one thing for us. All my friends and I really go, I really didn't know about the judges. So, Are there any bodies that do?
I can answer first and say, no, I can't, because we're a nonprofit, we don't have an advocacy arm, but there are organizations that do.
And the LA Progressive, which is the publication that my husband and I publish, whenever we have judicial elections, we run a piece called Judging the Judges. We collect information from the Los Angeles County Bar Association. They do a ranking. We collect information from the League of Women Voters. We collect information from several different sources, and we present that information and make it very clear that these are the organizations that are doing the endorsements or are doing the ratings. Sadly, oftentimes I will find that a judge is ranked by the Los Angeles County Bar Association. A candidate is ranked as not qualified, and that candidate will win. So people don't know that this information is available, but it is available in seven. So what we try to pull it together from several different sources, but you can go to the Los Angeles County Bar Association, League of Women Voters, and others to find these assessments of the judges. Extremely important.
What was your publication?
LAProgressive.com.
There's also a site online called the Roving Room that I go to all the time, and that is by users. That you'll see a lot of people who represented themselves, and you can usually tell their comments, but a lot of people like us who actually are in front of these judges. We have a very different take on who's qualified and who's not. And so you can go on the Roving Room and look up any judge in the country, and there'll be all kinds of comments from people who have been before that judge. That, sort of the real on the ground, what is the person's demeanor like? What are they like? Are they a jerk? Are they not a jerk? There's some pretty good information on there. You kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because anybody can post on there. But it's worth looking at because it is hard for lay people. I mean, most people fortunately don't end up in front of judges. So I think it's really kind of insane that the general population elects judges because we just tick a box and go, oh, incumbent, let me take that guy. But you don't have any reason to know if they're any good.
What is the spelling of that?
Roving room, yeah, just one word.
Perfect. Thank you.
So in California, abortion is covered under insurance. However, isn't there a loophole in terms of people who serve in the military and federal employees not being covered? I'm not sure, and I just wanted to get clarification on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Would that be insurance like that they have through the military?
Yeah, I
So I wonder if there's an out.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Federal funding can go to abortions, and so, and that, pot of money is separate. So that has not come up
Okay, because it's come up for us, and so I just wanted to see if there was any information on that.
That's super interesting. So I can't say that, when I say that insurance companies have to cover abortion, that's if you are managed by the California Department of Managed Care. And so that's most private insurance companies that operate in California. That would certainly exempt military and federal employees since they are operating kind of in a different sphere.
To preface, I'm a family law attorney, so I deal a lot with families who have children who were not aborted. And I can tell you after 29 years of doing this, that no matter how bad the problems are for those families, I've never, not once, seen any pro-life group step up to offer any help. Once they're born, we're no longer pro-life, I guess. But that's not my during this evening, there's been an awful lot of comment about Judge Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh. And that's understandable because he's well known, because there's been a lot of press about him and his hearings and so on. But we have another judge, Justice Mr. Gorsuch, who has an equally long appellate record, although no opinions yet on abortion in the Supreme Court. But a man of extraordinary conservative views. Does anybody from the ACLU have any opinions about where he is going to come down on court decisions dealing with reproductive health?
what about Gorsuch and where do we think he comes down? So the reason we're able to talk about Kavanaugh is like you said, Gorsuch doesn't have any opinions having to do with abortion. Abortion decisions are rare. There's not that many cases on abortions because this slew of restrictions and bans are fairly new in this particular way, especially from the federal government. So there's not a lot of federal judges who have had to rule on this. So we don't have anything in Gorsuch's history that tells us how he feels about this particular issue. We have plenty that tells us how he feels about women's rights in general and controlling people's bodies. And so we are not feeling any more optimistic about him than we are about Kavanaugh. But Kavanaugh has, a recent decision that we can point to where he has incredibly hostile and unsupportive language. We are concerned about all of the conservative justices, but because we don't have precedent that we can look to from them, we don't really know where they're going to fall in the restriction spectrum. In the total ban world, if Alabama or Tennessee are the ones that are appealed, and so they have to contend with the total ban, we really don't know where they're going to come out on that. If there's something less restrictive than that, if we're looking at some of the 8-week bans or 18-week bans, then I think they're more likely to uphold those bans. In the total ban, we don't really know where Gorsuch is going to come and where Roberts is going to come.
Well, I want to thank the speakers, Sharon Kyle and Aditi Fuitwala and Norma Rodriguez for a very interesting evening. I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot.